Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Voices of Resiliency, a podcast exploring the impact of crisis on children and youth. We partnered with Sherry from Lead Services, and our topic is disasters. We are a group of 5 fourth-year Bachelor of Child Studies students at Mount Royal University, completing our capstone project. This season's focus is children coming from war-torn countries, so if you want to hear more about that, stay tuned.
Welcome to episode 4. If you guys have been here for a while, thank you, and if you're new, welcome. If you tuned into our last episode, we dived into our early learning perspectives. If you missed that and want to hear more about it, what we discussed, it's currently available on YouTube and Spotify with more locations to follow. Today, we're switching gears, and we're excited to share insights with you on how we can support the youth that come from war-torn countries and how their transition and recovery can look different from the younger kiddos. My name is Zainab.
I'm Sheldon.
And I'm Katie.
And we're here to bring you a CYC perspective this episode.
We have 2 guests today. Katie, who is our fellow classmate. She is a CYC student here at Mount Royal University. We also have one of our professors from Mount Royal University, Michelle Briegel. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself and talk about how, as a child and youth care educator, you became involved in working with Sherry and the Lead Foundation?
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you. Like Sheldon said, my name is Michelle Briegel, and I am an associate professor at Mount Royal University in the Department of Child Studies and Social Work, specifically in the Bachelor of Child Studies program, Child and Youth Care Counselor major, or program as we also call it. And I also am the current president of the Child and Youth Care Association of Alberta. Both of these roles, allow me to have a perspective on child and youth care that is outside of the direct care practice, although I did do direct care for many, many years and managed programs in Calgary for a number of years as well. So I kind of come with that education, professional, and direct practice lens. My connection with Sherry and Lead Foundation actually goes back to when Sherry was a student at Mount Royal in the Bachelor of Child Studies program. And I was one of Sherry's instructors at the time. And we worked together on a research project that involved how to best support families with children during evacuation. And that came from Mount Royal University being a site for families who were evacuated on 2 different occasions. One was during the floods in Calgary, and the second time was the fires that occurred in Fort McMurray in northern Alberta. And we were an evacuation site for families. And at that time, we noted when the families were here that there were very little supports for the children and youth. There were the supports for the families in crisis in the moment that looked after their immediate needs, food, shelter, safety. There were people here helping them with their insurance needs. But what was occurring was that the children were kind of left on their own to play or to occupy their time while the adults were dealing with the fallout of their town being on fire. And we had some students who were volunteering at the evacuation center who noted that the kids were playing in the stairwells and the hallways and such, and just overhearing a lot of really intense, traumatic type conversation happening with the adults, and there was nothing for them. And so from that, we tried to support, and unfortunately we were unable to at the time, even though we did have resources and people here who could work with the children to provide a safe space. But due to limitations through Alberta Health Services and Red Cross, and not having what they thought was probably the proper licensure at the time to do that work, we weren't able to. And that led us on to thinking about, well, what actually is there for children and youth during these crisis times? Like, what supports are there that could help mitigate potential traumatic fallout later on? And so that started us on this research project to look at what has been done in the past, what's been done in other situations. And Sherry was a student doing leadership.
That's
It was
right.
a leadership practicum, yeah. And so Sherry and one of her other fellow students worked on the project with me to take a look at what can we do to better support children and youth and families during an evacuation after a natural disaster crisis, which is what we were looking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Then that moved on to Sherry graduating and starting her own program, Lead Services, and us reconnecting to take a look at how could we support from Mount Royal University perspective with capstone projects to help build the capacity of programs that work with children, youth, and families to help support their needs for crisis, disaster management support, mitigation, those types of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's been quite the journey.
That's awesome. I think there's a really big gap that needs to be addressed. And of course, there's nothing like that. There was nothing like that. Now there is, which is great, and everyone's learning about it. And we're also getting the experience because as child and youth care counselors, you don't think about when disasters happen like that, like natural disasters or man-made disasters. You only think about mental health, anxiety, depression, PTSD, but you don't think about disasters in that context. So I'm glad we're getting that information and that knowledge that we can help the children as well with. So thank you. We're really excited for you to be here. What do you think the specific needs or issues are that currently are under addressed in the field?
So I think that there's probably a number that are under addressed from different perspectives. Right now, from a child and youth care perspective, and I can speak to what's happening in Alberta, a little bit more nationally and internationally, but my primary focus is in Alberta. And I think that, like you said, we haven't focused much on disaster or crisis management, right, in child and youth care practice and education. We focus on what's in our scope of practice, how do we support children and youth in their daily life events, within their life space, within what we call the other 23 hours, which means the other 23 hours of the day outside of a 1-hour therapy session where many child and youth care counselors work. So that could be in group homes, it might be even in before and after school care settings, it might be in community settings or in schools. But we do a lot of work in residential living type situations, right?
Yeah.
As well as in-home support, we do some of that too. So thinking about it from that perspective, I think that child and youth care counselors lack specialized training in working with the refugee population, children, youth, and families that have come from countries at war. And so thinking about things like understanding war itself, displacement from war, and the trauma experiences that young people may have experienced either in their country with war happening or in transition to come to Canada, so refugee camp, that sort of thing. We have not focused much in that area with education or with child and youth care training.
Yeah, I don't recall anything like that.
No.
Never learning about anything, never hearing about anything like that. And then when you come into when you're going even into the workforce, you don't know what to expect 100% with the refugees especially because you don't know how to work with them. You don't know how to help them or help them integrate into society. And it's really big gap.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we, in recent years, have done a really good job at providing professional development and training for child and youth care counselors in better understanding the experiences of Indigenous families and Indigenous youth and what they have experienced, what their culture and cultural experiences are, and integrating those better into programs. We have talked a lot about how do we do the same for other cultures?
Mhm.
However, there's so many cultures. So how do we appropriately train all the child and youth care counselors to understand all the different cultures? We can't, right?
No, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just don't have the space, the space in time and the funding that's required, which I think is one of the other issues.
Oh,
is
yes.
that in order to train people, you have to have the money to be able to bring the trainers in, but you also have to have the money to be able to backfill the people that you're taking off of the floor, right, to attend training.
Yeah.
So somebody needs to work the floor, and so there's those costs associated with it.
Yeah.
And most of our programs and organizations rely on funding from other sources, one of those main sources being the Alberta government. And so when they're relying on their training dollars coming from a funder who dictates how much money they're going to get and what training that can be used for, then it becomes challenging to appropriately train everybody to meet the needs of all of the clients that they might serve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot that funding, it goes up and down constantly. Everything's always being reevaluated. So how do you believe the current policies can be improved to enhance the experiences of refugee children and their families in child and youth care programs?
That's a great question. I think collaboration. So collaboration among individual agencies, but also among the sector. So if we look at the sector that serves child and youth care, one of the primary sectors that we work within is child and family services or child welfare in other jurisdictions. And that sector can involve foster care, in-home support, group care, campus-based care, a variety of different care models. But within that sector, primarily, the children are under the care of the government in some capacity. So having collaborative conversations within that sector and with the government about the needs for training, for resources and supplies and different things that might help create what we call the milieu, which is like the environment, to be more reflective of different cultures. And especially if we know that we're going to be serving children, youth, and families from certain cultures that might be, fleeing their country to come here. I think that we can probably be more intentional in looking at that and developing some policy and procedure around what do we do? How do we ensure that we are constantly keeping this on our radar, so to speak, and that it doesn't fall off and become just a one-off situation?
Yeah.
Can I just jump in for a sec? So when you talk about that, the interactive compartmentalizing of our practice, it brings to mind the fact that we don't currently possess the political will to put the funds, to allocate the funds because of all the compartmentalization. And when we collaborate, when we work together, when we recognize that there is value in different organizations, different agencies, and different professionals collectively working together, then we start to build awareness, we start to build an opportunity to advocate, we start to bring some information that can filter out into places we never expected it to go. And those are the things that start to drive the political will up. Like if we are working as professionals, we tend to get in these, I don't want to say silos because it's not exactly the right word, but when we're looking at group care, we have group care that caters to a particular issue with a group of children or youth.
Yeah.
And then we have another facility that caters to a particular issue with children or youth.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not reasonable to be interactive with the actual children. But as far as the professionals go, we should be talking to each other. We should be supporting each other because we're having similar struggles, just in a unique way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And so when we start to collaborate, when we start to work together, and we start to have those conversations, and just to do training together,
Yeah.
just to create opportunities where we can train together or learn about a particular subject, those are the things that are going to drive the political will up and start to allow for us to use compartmentalization to our advantage,
Mm-hmm.
because we can stack it differently
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
know what each other's issues are and how we can help each other.
Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And with that, also, what role do you believe that these community organizations can play in advocating for these policy changes?
Yeah, I think that the advocacy piece is ongoing, and that's where I think, going back to the collaboration, is that it connects with both the collaboration and the silo, right?
Mhm.
Each organization is advocating for their particular needs to keep their organization and their programs afloat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're doing that. And then we've got a larger sector that's advocating for larger issues. And depending on the political climate at the time is going to depend on what their battles are,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes it might be battling to have enough funding just to keep the program afloat, to be able to pay the bills, pay the staff, get food for the kids, and address those needs, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Other times they might have a little bit more ability to ask for other things. It really ebbs and flows with the government and who the ministers are at the time and what the directives are that they receive from the government. So, but having said that, I think that having these conversations collectively is what's going to be the main factor that's going to move us towards a more collective advocacy.
Yeah.
Just like we
Mhm.
saw happening with how do we collectively become more aware of the needs of Indigenous children and youth in our programs,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? That did become a collective effort.
Mhm.
And so I think that it will happen within that same way.
Yeah.
I also think that having conversations from students, having conversations that are initiated by students,
Okay.
perhaps, right? Because you're
Yeah.
learning, and then you're bringing this information to the places you're working
Yeah.
and saying, we're learning about this.
Mhm.
We're aware that there is more of a need. Maybe the organization that you're working with or doing a practicum at or something might not be completely aware of the larger need because they are kind of working within their world of what is their organization and their program and their needs day to day,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
And I see that a lot working as well. I feel like a lot of youth advocates are also sometimes scared to speak up because they don't know if they're going to be heard or if they're going to be, like, they don't know if they can lose their position if they're speaking up for things like that. So I feel like I've seen a lot of that as well. Like, it's hard to speak up, but I think standing as a group, as professionals in this field, we need to advocate for these changes because it is very important and it needs to be seen, it needs to be heard, and we need to help the children. That's what we're here for. So I totally agree with that.
And all of you, new graduates, younger, newer staff people working in programs, you're going to be the next generation of people who are team leads, supervisors, managers, and you will bring to that your perspective and your world knowledge
Yeah.
and understanding, and you'll bring some of those things forward,
100%.
right? Our
for
work
sure.
is always growing and changing.
Oh,
It is,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, now, Katie, you've been exploring something that I think a lot of people don't fully understand, acquired disabilities in children and youth. It's a perspective we're really eager to hear before we get into the specifics, can you paint us a picture of what you mean by acquired disabilities?
Yeah, sure. So there's two kind of types of disabilities. So you have an acquired disability and then a disability you're born with. An acquired disability refers to any disability or impairment that develops or is acquired after birth. So that would be something like accidents and illnesses, so accidents, traumatic head injuries, spinal cord injuries from things like car accidents, sports injury. And then we also have health and illness-related disabilities, so that would be like from the polio outbreak that resulted in paralysis. And that's an example of illness. We can also see some impacts from like long COVID. We don't have the data supporting long term, but from what we know now, we can estimate that that is going to have a lasting impact on some folks who are more vulnerable to that. We also see it in things like diabetes, which can cause loss of limbs or loss of mobility. So.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people actually think about that unless they're directly involved in it or know someone.
Totally. Well, and acquired disabilities are unique because it's something that anyone at any time can be affected by. In a split second. You can join this community.
When we think about the unique challenges faced by children and youth fleeing war zones, how does the issue of acquired disabilities intersect with their experiences? And what are the most pressing gaps and supports that you've identified through your research?
Sure. Well, as far as disabilities acquired in war-torn countries, often they are actually a result of armed conflict, explosions, or exposure to hazardous materials. Actually, in fact, in 2023, the World Health Organization reported that there are 1.3 billion people globally who have a disability, and 16% of those are attributed to armed conflict. 16%.
Wow. That's a big number.
16%. And we don't have too many supports or frameworks to support a person who might acquire their disability in war.
It sounds like there's a lot to it. Like, it sounds like there's a lot of factors that contribute to A, the acquisition of a disability, and B, the way that you're supported. And when you think about the fact that children are vulnerable just simply by being children, then that, again, compounds, it brings a whole new layer of complexity to being able to serve and support and contribute to their rehabilitation or whatever, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's one of the things too that does contribute to disability. It doesn't cause disability, but it puts people at a more vulnerable situation to potentially acquire disability. One of the main reasons is socioeconomic status, access to healthcare, access to supports and networks, even just being ignorant to the services that are available.
Right.
But when it comes to people fleeing from war-torn countries, it can be especially challenging when arriving in Canada, having to navigate all of these different services in order to access disability support, which is already new to these families. But we understand that seeking supports and navigating the system to look for funding, to look for specialized services, that's already challenging enough. The wait times are ridiculous. And a lot of these families needs disability support upon arrival. A lot of them are coming over and they are newly disabled, and it's a new experience for them. So not only are they having to navigate whatever kind of impairment they sustained as a result of disaster, but they also have to do it when entering a new country where they don't speak English and where a lot of the people who work in immigration, the supporting disabled youth is not one of the priorities, I would say.
Okay.
I think there is a really great attempt for harm reduction and supporting these young people and families, but I definitely think there is a big gap in services specifically related to children who either came over with a born disability or those who acquired a disability.
Okay, yeah, that definitely does add a lot to any family, because when we had our previous podcast with Hamza, he was explaining how difficult it can be just people coming in.
Oh yeah, because there's so many people
Navigating.
coming in now, and they don't have enough space. And what I've heard and seen is that, of course, this is an important factor. The first priority is finding a home and a stable, like, living place, work. But I also think the disability part gets moved to the side, and no one thinks about that. But you don't know how much that's affecting the children and youth and their families, and it's gonna take time to recover. But also, it can get worse if it's not, like, taken care of or looked at or even talked about. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's too, like, the physiological needs of, like, food, shelter, safety. A lot of these kind of like temporary housing or like crisis kind of like emergency camps. They a lot of them are actually inaccessible, and that's not any fault to some of these facilities, but you do the best you can with the resources that are available, which might be scarce due to funding or just direct access. But a lot of them aren't accessible, and often because of the kind of displacement of the healthcare system and existing networks, disabled children and families actually find it extremely difficult to access medical care, especially in instances of evacuation or placement in temporary housing, which may be, in some cases, hours away from your home or your disaster. So you have to navigate that in a new city, which is challenging to begin with. But when you're not sure what supports you're looking for, that's also very difficult.
Yep, 100%, I agree with that.
Just through this conversation, I've kind of realized there seems to be a gap in the interdisciplinary communication just between different companies, areas, because everyone's kind of focusing on their own area of expertise, but there's not much communication going on, much like, Michelle, you were talking about earlier with there was nothing for kids during the fires, and they were just playing in the halls.
You're right. There's a lack of integration with services and communication to see where the gap is. So going back to that time with the children here on campus during the fires, there were some programs that came in eventually through the city of Calgary, and there were recreation programs. What was lacking that we noted was that they didn't have a trauma-informed approach or trauma-informed understanding. And so the people who were doing the programs, they were great recreational leaders, and they got the kids out playing soccer, doing things like that, but not understanding fully the trauma-informed perspective and the types of activities that could help to mitigate the potential for post-traumatic experiences for young people. And that's something that child and youth care counselors learn how to do, right? You learn how to use activity in a way that can help regulate and help mitigate potential post-traumatic experiences down the road. That's not to say that there won't be any, but we do know some of the things that help to mitigate the severity of it. And so thinking back to that, the services, is that we've got separate service areas. So we've got mental health services, education, resettlement services, housing, employment, education, healthcare. These are all huge services in the province. And they, if you look at it from a political perspective, they all have their own ministries as well, and their own policies and procedures. And so, and they don't communicate well together. And they don't have a lot of time for communicating either, right? And if we think about the people who are in direct practice in all of these service areas, they really don't have the time to communicate because they have high caseloads, they're working overtime, there's a lot of turnover in direct practice. And so there's so many gaps in the system where children, youth, and families fall through on a regular basis. And then we complicate that, more with more vulnerable needs, right? So, being displaced due to war, being a refugee, being an immigrant, being somebody with a disability, and the complication becomes even more complex.
Well, that's what I noticed in some of my research was that one of the biggest problems for children and youth with disabilities was actually the disruption to physical, social, and economic environmental networks. When your doctor isn't able to reach the specialist because, they're rationing healthcare and they're needing doctors or to work more frontline. A lot of times necessary surgeries are pushed back. Services like respite or in-home disability care is also disrupted. We even saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic. There were a lot of kids with pretty complex medical needs.
It's so difficult to to help people understand the value and importance of meeting a need when you don't have that need or you don't understand that need.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it is an aspect of emotional intelligence that we don't consider when we're talking about services that are made available or need to be made available. Totally. So you bring up respite, and unless you are a parent who has experienced the energy that it takes, the mental, emotional, and physical energy that it takes to care for a child with a disability, you don't understand that respite is not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity in your ability to be a good parent, an effective parent, a loving parent, a kind parent, a patient parent, or caregiver, whatever the circumstance is, right? And that is a very difficult thing to help decision makers and people in that political arena understand that, we get that from the outside looks like a luxury because respite is seen as the opportunity for you to go out to dinner or the opportunity for you to do something fun, and that is perceived as a luxury in our society. But that's not what it means. What it means is you can take a mental break. You can take an emotional break. You can take a physical break. And something as simple as having time to have a shower when you're the caregiver and you haven't is incredibly valuable. But that ability to see a need, to meet a need, and to fill a need when you don't have it or understand it is a critical piece to what you're talking about with respect to that.
Totally. And like respite I like to think of respite as a mental health intervention for the parents. That it's something that we do to help with the burnout and decrease that. And I just think about being evacuating from a disaster. That entire process would already be draining for any parent that's without a home, trying to feed kids and navigate clothing and all this stuff like that. But for children and youth families with disabilities, the impact is a lot larger, and you see it almost immediately when services are cut off from you. it's something that you directly feel, and it's impacted, and it's even more difficult for the children and youth because the disruption to their everyday life can be especially challenging for a lot of these young people who might rely on that familiarity. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think child and youth care counselors would really do well in supporting these families and children in being able to provide a little bit of that respite. And in that, we can also provide different rec opportunities or opportunities for new immigrants to gather and talk and support each other, especially when it comes to families who have children with disabilities, who understand the unique struggles, the vulnerabilities, and just kind of like the culture of being a parent with a child who has a disability or medical complex needs. So
I think the other thing to keep in mind is the parents also are probably dealing with their own traumatic experiences, perhaps their own emergent disability issues that have come from war, their own language barriers and emotional responses that are happening to being relocated to another country, or having been in a refugee camp along the way, where we don't understand. If we haven't been there, we don't understand what happens in that journey, along that journey. And so I think that one thing that we could be doing better is having people who have refugee experience involved in our organizations and our programs, and can provide some insight into what the needs might be. Because without any of us experiencing it firsthand, we're making an assumption that we know what their needs are going to be, which historically we have done since the beginning of the helping professions, right? That we know what you need. But do we really?
We don't.
You can only learn so much through research, and having actual practice with it or experience with it is much different.
Well, and I think part of that is ego. Like if I'm the professional and I'm the expert, then I should know. I shouldn't have to ask somebody else what I'm the. And so getting out of that mindset, and I really do think that is going to come with younger generations coming in with the attitude of I am an expert, not the expert. I am, I have a set of skills. I have a special set of skills. But getting away from that ego piece where we feel like because I'm the person getting paid to do this thing and create this program or whatever it is, I should know all of these things and be able to answer all these questions and do all this stuff, right? Let that go.
Yep. Agreed. Well, I hope all of us as professionals, newly grads, we're actually going into the field, with a good mindset, but an open mindset, that we still have a lot to learn. And we learned so much from you guys. Like, you guys are still learning. You guys are still growing. And I think everyone in, these professions need to understand that there's so much to learn. There's so much to, grow. And every day is going to be different. But you're going to get a lot of experience. And as well as, how would you say it? It's okay sometimes to not know something and do your research on it. Though we've had the education, you haven't had the education on every single thing that's going to come your way. So I agree with that. But thank you so much for your guys' insights and resources that you guys provided us with today. I think it's really helpful. I think our listeners and viewers, they're going to find it helpful, and hopefully everyone learns from this. And that is all for today's episode on supporting youth from war-torn countries. We hope to see you all next time for another episode on Echoes of our Capstone Journey. That's going to be our last podcast. And it's going to be where we're reflecting on our experiences and journey throughout the past year. Once again, my name is Zainab.
I'm Sheldon.
I'm Katie.
And this is Voices of Resiliency.
Voices of Resiliency was written by Alyssa Belleville, Sheldon Kopus, Kaylee Lachance, Zainab Nadim, and Willa Marshall. It is edited, directed, and produced by Willa Marshall. A special thanks to Sherry Haslam Easterbrook with lead services. Music is by Devere Silver from Pixabay.